Hey everybody, the Sneaky Snake here for Brothers in Arms World of Warships, and today's video we're going to take a look at the Tier 10 German heavy cruiser, the Hindenburg. The Hindenburg here at Tier 10 is a Swiss Army knife of German destruction. There are guns littered all over this thing. Primaries, secondaries, torpedoes, AA, and this thing is just a straight-up damage dealer in a somewhat medium-range brawler, and it's a very good ship here at the high tiers. We're going to take a look at the ship, statistics, the captain skills, equipment, and consumables that I run and use, and then I'm going to give you one healthy dose of gameplay. Let's begin. So what exactly do we have here with the Tier 10 Hindenburg? Well, as I mentioned earlier, this is a very good medium-range brawler kind of ship, and to be honest with you, it's somewhat of a departure from the playstyle that you've learned playing the Admiral Hipper at Tier 8 and the Rune at Tier 9. Both of those reviews we have already done, and the links are provided in the video right now. Anyway, the Hindenburg takes a lot of those good traits from those two ships, and it infuses them with some other things that just makes this thing more of a battle cruiser or light battleship kind of playstyle in the game, to be honest with you. And this thing has just, without a question, the best armament of any Tier 10 cruiser. It just has really fast-firing guns, a collection of lower caliber weapons that just deal damage, and that's really what this thing is for. It's very good at going up against battleships. It's very good at taking out cruisers. It has the capacity to take out destroyers in a pinch. This thing just overall is a very scary ship to be left alone, and the replay today will certainly show you why. So first of all, we're going to take a look at the statistics of the ship and just kind of give you an overview of how this thing performs. Survivability. The ship, when fully upgraded, well, it's a Tier 10, so it already comes fully upgraded, has 51,900 hit points and has up to 110 millimeters of Citadel armor and 13% torpedo protection damage reduction from its torpedo belt. Taking a look here at the ship with the new armor viewer that was just released in one of the previous patches, we're going to take a look here at the belt armor on the side, the belt armor above the waterline, the barbettes, and the turrets. The turrets and the barbettes are moderately armored. Again, 110 millimeters is where the Citadel on the ship, and as you can see, looking at it, the majority of that Citadel lies completely beneath the water. Now, I don't know for sure, but I do believe the Rune at Tier 9 and this thing have somewhat of a turtleback armor design, much like the German battleships from Tiers 7 and up do. And you just really don't take that many Citadels in this thing. They do happen, especially from battleship caliber rounds, but it really does take you showing a complete broadside for that to happen. And other cruisers will be able to get solid penetrating damage with AP on your superstructure and your upper belt armor, but certainly going down to the waterline, it just doesn't seem like it happens all that much. So the armor is very workable in the Hindenburg, and as you'll see in the replay, you're actually able to do a fair bit amount of tanking other enemy ships' shells with this thing. Artillery. Easily the best part of the Hindenburg and why this thing is so darn deadly. You have a total of 12 203mm guns arranged in 4 turrets, 2 at the front and 2 in the rear, super firing pair with 3 guns apiece. These are the same glorious cannons that you started with on the Admiral Hipper, where you had 8 of them, and then the Rune at Tier 9 with 9 of them, and now 12 of these dastardly guns here on the Hindenburg. They fire the meanest AP round on a cruiser in the game, with a Citadel doing 5,900 damage. You have a very healthy firing range of 17.8 kilometers, the shell velocity over 900 meters a second, which is fantastic, and even the high explosive got buffed a couple patches ago and has a pretty decent 13% fire chance, even though the damage is low. But the real main thing about the Hindenburg is the reload time. With the correct equipment piece added, 8.8 second reload. That is absolutely insane. You're almost shooting as fast as a Cleveland with 8-inch vice 6-inch guns. The secondaries on the ship are okay. You do get 16 of those 105 millimeters, but it's not as many as you would have on the Rune. And the Rune is the only cruiser off the top of my head that I can think that has a pretty good secondary armament. So while you do trade a little bit of your secondaries, it's a cruiser. Again, not really worried about that, but you do trade some secondaries for other areas of your ship. One of the areas that you trade some secondaries for is the torpedoes. You get 2 quad launchers on each side of the ship, port and starboard, for a total of 16 of those glorious 533mm torpedoes. They run at a speed of 64 knots, 13,700 maximum damage, and a 6-kilometer torpedo range. These are literally the same torps you've had since the Königsberg at Tier 5. However, having 8 of them on each side presents you the ability, more so in a defensive situation, but certainly if you want to be hyper-aggressive in this ship, to just absolutely lay in some torpedoes at point-blank range. Certainly coming across a Des Moines or Moskva at point-blank range in some scenarios will give you a very good opportunity to absolutely delete them with the full salvo. And while these torpedoes aren't as good as the Zhao, the other Tier 10 Japanese cruiser that has torpedoes, its Japanese counterpart, these are very workable in certain circumstances. But again, much like with the other German heavy cruisers, you really don't want to be using these things in an offensive manner, because you're going to have to give up a lot of hit points before you even come into remotely good firing distances, and by then your ship will have already taken quite a beating. But nonetheless, these are very good defensive torpedoes. The other thing that you trade secondaries for is the AA. This ship is littered with AA guns of different calibers, 20, 55, and 105 millimeter dual-purpose guns. However, the main gun that you get here that just makes the Hindenburg so good with AA is the L-77 Garot 58. You get 14 of these guns, and they are double-barreled, as you can see here on screen. This is the one that's at the front of the ship. These are very quirky-looking guns, and they are placed at very peculiar spots around the ship, on top of the turrets, and at the fore and after ends of the ship. However, these really accentuate the AA on this ship, and if you go with advanced and basic firing training and nothing else, you can get an AA rating of 95. Now, that's second only to the Des Moines in terms of AA firepower, and these German cruisers a long time ago got a nice AA buff, at least the high-tier ones, and these guns are really, really good at swatting down planes out of the sky. Even against Tier 9 carriers, you really shouldn't have too much of an issue, and indeed, the most amount of planes I've ever shot down in a game was 44, courtesy of the Hindenburg. I do not run defensive fire AA, but more on that in a little bit. But nonetheless, very, very good set of AA guns here on this Tier 10 cruiser. Not everything, though, about the Hindenburg is very good, and one of the parts that suffers is the maneuverability. 31.5 knots maximum speed. You are going to get outpaced by every cruiser Tier 8 and up in the game, and what that means is that at the beginning of games, you have to be careful about your positioning in this ship, and that's more higher-level thinking, to be honest with you, but you know, by Tier 10, you really need to learn those go-to spots on the map and where you can utilize the okay concealment rating on the ship, and the maneuverability certainly is tied into that quite a bit, but being at a slight speed disadvantage to the American and a massive speed disadvantage to the Soviet and Japanese presents you with just getting too far stretched forward at the beginning of the game and having your hit points get taken away. The turning circle is very rough at 800 meters, very, very poor for a heavy cruiser. It's the worst at Tier 10, and the rudder shift time of 9.7 seconds, that's only with the rudder equipment piece added. It's very, very bad, to be honest with you. Going with Vigilance as a captain's perk is not a bad idea. However, I will hit on the captain's perks more in a little bit. So maneuverability is definitely not the forte of the Hindenburg. Another thing that suffers with the Hindenburg is the concealment. With a full concealment build, 12.3 kilometer surface detection range, and 8.4 detection range by aircraft, it's okay. 12.3 is still better than any Tier 8 and up battleship, except for the Tirpitz, which I believe it is tied with at 12.3 if you go full concealment build on both ships. So you're still going to outspot every battleship, but some of them, like the American higher tier ones, not by much, only a kilometer or so on the Iowa and the Montana. And what that means is that, again, going back to the maneuverability aspect, if you put yourself in a bad position at the beginning of the game, you do not have the speed to get out of there, and you do not have the concealment rating to be able to go invisible and reassess the situation and, you know, just get yourself out of there. And it's a very bad thing to be taking damage in this thing early in the game. So just know that your concealment is not very good. Zhao's, Des Moines, Baltimore's, Ibukis, they're going to get the first jump on you. And again, if you're the only one out there or at the lead ship in the formation, you're going to be taking quite a bit of unnecessary damage. So just be aware that the concealment is pretty pathetic. Taking a look now at the captain's skills, when I mentioned earlier about the ship being a battle cruiser or a light battleship, this is exactly what I'm talking about. For the Tier 1 skills on the captain, I do have basics of survivability along with basic firing training. Basics of survivability is generally something that you reserve to your battleships, but again, since this thing has a healthy amount of hit points to throw around, it's nice to not take as much fire and flooding damage as you would in, say, other cruisers where you really don't need to go with that captain skill. For the Tier 2, Expert Marksman is very nice. With the rate of fire equipment piece, it slows down your turret traverse by a significant degree. Going with Expert Marksman will completely negate that, so you get the pro of being able to fire faster without actually really sacrificing any of your turret traverse. For Tier 3, this is the other departure from a normal cruiser build. I go with Superintendent instead of Vigilance. Now, I did mention earlier that Vigilance is very good to have on the ship, and that much is true. And even up through the Tier 9 rune, I did have Vigilance, but then I realized I kind of wanted to play this thing more like a Scharnhorst, so a pocket battleship. And I decided to go with Superintendent to get that that extra health pack. And to be honest with you, if you use premium consumables with Superintendent, you can get 4 or 5 reloads on your damage control on this thing, and you can get theoretical amount of hit points over 70,000 as long as you're not taking too much damage from citadels and AP rounds and you're just getting burnt. And that's a lot of hit points to throw around, to be honest with you. Tier 4 advanced firing training, pretty standard to get that rating over 90 to make your AA really good. And then obviously for Tier 5, going with concealment, it's a mandatory on just any cruiser in the game, and you certainly don't want to be taking the ship out with nothing less than a 15-point captain, so you can get the concealment. So a pretty standard build for cruisers, but definitely asterisks when it comes to basics of survivability and Superintendent. For me, this is my playstyle. I really enjoy it, and getting every bit of hit points that I can out of this ship really does make it last longer and just, again, deal damage in the process. Taking a look now at the consumables, at Tier 10 and all the high tiers, to be honest with you, you really need to go premium, certainly because all the other players will probably be doing it, but also you're not worried about making credits at these high tiers, you're worried about doing as good as possible. So for the repair party, for damage control, and for the catapult fighter, I go with premium, and as well for the hydroacoustic at the second slot, which is a bit of a controversial decision among some people, specifically my buddy Puddin. Now there's two schools of thought. If you go with an AA build, defensive fire AA is certainly the right choice to go, and it can turn the Hindenburg into a AA defense rating of over 100 and just make this thing, a nightmare for enemy aircraft. But with the dearth of Tier 10, Tier 9, and Tier 8 carriers, I prefer to go hydroacoustic. I've mentioned how good hydro is in my Hipper and Rune review, and I will not be going over that in this one, but just know that it has about a 6-kilometer detection range and it lasts for 2 minutes. This is the Germans' forte with the hydro, and it's very good for aggressively pushing into caps to get destroyers out of their smoke and make them flee, but I also use it more in a passive role as sort of a vigilance, like you have that captain skill on, because it detects torpedoes at 3.5 to 4 kilometers, which is plenty of time to get out of the way, so I treat it like a little bit of a pocket vigilance, and it really works out nicely for me. Puddin doesn't necessarily agree with it, but, I did give you the two different playstyles that we do on this ship, so it's just more food for thought. But for mine, if I want to be a battleship tanky kind of build, I'm definitely going to go with that, because, again, as I mentioned in survivability, the torpedo protection is very poor at 13%, so being able to dodge as many torpedoes as possible is a must. And lastly, for the equipment slots, I'm going to beat a dead horse here again. You want to maximize out your guns and work on your weaknesses and maneuverability and concealment. Again, you're trying to go with a battleship-esque, light battleship, battlecruiser kind of build. So for the first 3 slots, pretty standard. Go with the gun survivability, gun accuracy, and the reload. Certainly good stuff there to make these 203mm main guns just as terrifying as possible. For the 5th and 6th slot, I go with the rudder shift to improve the maneuverability and the concealment to how about that? Improve the concealment, right? But for that 4th slot, this is the only place that I do not make this ship into that battleship kind of build, and I decided to go with the engine modification so that it doesn't get knocked out as often. Battleships really don't get their engines knocked out at all, so you would definitely go with ship survivability there. However, with the Hindenburg, since it's a cruiser, cruisers tend to get their engines knocked out a lot more often than you'd think. So while going with the ship survivability slot in that slot number 4, it's a good idea. I prefer to go with the propulsion, because nothing is worse than getting this thing's engine knocked out when you're within range of enemy ships. And not only that, you're within your concealment range, so you cannot just, go invisible and get out of there, and it just presents a horrible, horrible opportunity for you to be exploited on. So that's why I go with the engine modification. But other than that, pretty standard. Those are the same equipment pieces that I used on my Tier 9 Rune. So with that being said, we've taken a look at the Hindenburg statistics, the captain skills, equipment, and consumables. Again, this thing is quite the tanky ship, and you do not want to be the one getting fired at, focused on, but it really does just fit that medium-range kind of brawler-esque kind of playstyle. And let me tell you, this replay that you're about to see coming up is going to highlight pretty much everything that I talked about, and it's one of my most complete games in the ship. So without further ado, let's take a look at the replay, and I'll discuss just how to play this German beast. Alrighty guys, let's take a look at the gameplay here. I'm divisioned up with my buddies ElasticSpyder and Puddin597. Spider is in his Tier 9 Japanese heavy cruiser, the Yabuki, and my buddy Puddin is in his Tier 10 Soviet destroyer, the Khabarovsk. And we're playing some domination here on one of the newer maps in the game, Loop. So, on this map, generally Objective Alpha is the main contention point for the heavy surface units in the game. Battleships and even heavy cruisers as well like to go over there too. And it's also frequented by at least a destroyer or two every game. It's pretty much a guarantee. So what am I trying to get at here? Generally speaking, this is the main contention point on the map, and if you're able to control Objective Alpha in the surrounding area, you'll be able to sweep in towards Objective Bravo and be able to get 2 of the 3 caps and then hold on for a nice victory. So, the Hindenburg here in this game, as I mentioned earlier, you're just going to see just how deadly this thing is. And to be honest with you, the playstyle where you're more at medium range, which I've harped on many times during this review, is just, it's something that I really enjoy with this ship. And being able to do consistent damage in the Hindenburg is something that just happens a lot for me personally in this ship. I'm just going to really quickly pull up statistics page here from the website that I use to evaluate my statistics and whatnot, World of Warships stats and numbers on the NA portal. And as you can see here, I deal a massive amount of damage in the Hindenburg. And, you know, some people might think, oh, you're just a damage whore, you don't really care about the victory or not or whatever. I understand that completely, and even some of my buddies have told me before that sometimes it seems like that I just care more about dealing damage. But, you know, I understand their gripes and complaints, but to be honest with you, I think that dealing damage is one of the most important things in the game, because as long as you're dealing damage to the enemy team and not taking much back in return, you're helping your team out immensely. And again, in a Hindenburg, I really like to pick on battleships because they don't really respect this thing's 8-inch guns until they start taking massive amounts of armor-piercing salvos, and just over and over and over again. And you're going to see here, there's going to be plenty of just really high-rolling AP salvos that I land on enemy battleships that certainly will grab their attention. So here at the beginning of the game, our carrier planes have sent themselves over Objective Alpha. There is an enemy destroyer on Alpha, and there's also an enemy destroyer on Objective Bravo as well. And pretty much all of our team is heading over here towards Alpha and Bravo. So certainly, just like by design, I think, most of the team, both sides, is going to be coming over here to the western side of the map. And right here at the beginning, some of the enemy battleships with more poor detection ranges, ironic that I say that as the Turpets get spotted, are coming over here to the west as well, but there's also an enemy Azumo. I did catch a Grosse Kurfürst over here as well, and I believe that's him getting spotted just off to my starboard side, I think. There's also an enemy Hindenburg that got spotted over here as well. The enemy has since captured Objective Alpha, and they just capture Objective Bravo. My first salvo of the game goes for almost 6,000 points of damage on the Turpets. Yep, there's the Grosse Kurfürst, and an enemy Amagi appears as well. Get another decent salvo into the Turpets, and within about 8 to 10 seconds, I've dealt almost 10,000 points of damage to that enemy battleship. Now, I don't know about you, but trading almost 10k hit points for literally 0 is pretty good. I do take a decent hit from the enemy Amagi, but it's only just over 4,000 damage, and, you know, I can deal with that. I got plenty of hit points, no big deal whatsoever. Get some more armor-piercing salvos here at the enemy Amagi. Unfortunately for me, my aim was just a bit high on the first salvo, and did the same thing here on the second one. Most of the shells impact the deck. Now, you're going to see here just the raw AP damage. This Grosse Kurfürst is completely broadside to me as I land 1770 on the Amagi. I shoot, and I start to turn back to starboard. My shells are going to fly into the superstructure, and oh yeah, 1110. What a freaking salvo right there. The second salvo in only does 2,500, but after 2 salvos, over 13,000 damage to that enemy Grosse Kurfürst. And 2 salvos on the Turpets, about 9,600. 3 on the Grosse Kurfürst, and I get about 13,000, just a little bit over. I don't know about you, but if I was those enemy battleships, I'd be pretty upset with myself. And I just happened to catch an enemy Mogami full broadside at 10 kilometers. Unfortunately, my first shots, just a bit high and a little too far in front, only do about 5,000 damage, but I certainly will have enough time with this great reload to get another salvo off, and I do a fantastic 16,000 points of damage with 1 glorious citadel and a few more penetrating strikes. And that enemy Mogami just had more than 2/3 of his health absolutely deleted in a snap. More shells flying in on the Azumo, 9,700 points of damage. Most of the shells impacting the upper portion of the belt armor where it's really weak. And all of a sudden, 57,000 damage. And I've only been down here at the objective for about 2 minutes shooting. About 2,000 damage there. Enemy planes, high-level bombers, dive bombers, that is, flying back over me, and my AA guns are getting into action, and all of a sudden the enemy planes are getting swatted out of the sky. 5,300 damage done to the enemy Azumo, a very nice solid salvo there, and in 3 salvos on the Azumo, over 14,000 damage done. Getting my rear turrets now on the Grosse Kurfürst. He's completely broadside. Unfortunately, I aimed just a bit too far, and the majority of the shells are going to impact right next to the forward turret, and I do not deal any damage. So, really quickly right there, just a couple minutes, 66,000 points of damage. If I'm not mistaken, that is already more than the average amount of damage that people do in this ship. And just getting those enemy battleships just to get behind the island and get in cover because they really need to get out of there. And I've only taken a few moderately heavy hits. I do use my first damage control ability to get some health back. And by the time I do, I'm going to have about 46,000 hit points to work with. And I've dealt 67,000 back out. Yeah, that's a pretty darn good trade if you ask me. And I wasn't just shooting indiscriminately at one battleship. I was able to spread my fire between 3 different ones and an enemy Mogami as well and deal some very, very significant damage. So at this point, the enemy has also captured Objective Charlie. Our friends have come into Objective Alpha and taken it, and the enemy still has control of Objective Bravo. The score is 372 to 435, and so far, it's not we're not in a bad situation, but nobody has been sunk yet. And we're definitely going to have to start killing some ships here really quickly before the enemy scores get way too much. I'm shooting armor piercing at the enemy turret's bow end completely, and pretty much all my rounds bounce, so I switch to my first salvos of high explosive. I did catch the enemy Azumo firing at me, and I was able to slow down and turn into port just enough before his shells landed harmlessly just off the bow. I do about 3,300 damage on my first salvo with the turrets with high explosive, 1,652 with the second, and then I switch back to armor piercing. Turrets on a full broadside, I should be able to do some decent damage here. Unfortunately for me, the superstructure has been soaked a little bit from damage, and I only manage about 3,000 on the first one. And as my second set is going in, we'll see the kind of damage we can do here. Shells falling in on the target. Pretty decent hit. About 3,800. Not bad for the target being well angled and 4 of the shells failing to penetrate. Unfortunately, the friendly Fubuki out in front of me gets taken care of. And except for my buddy Spider way out to the west behind the 2 westernmost islands on the 2 line and a friendly battleship that's also off to my port side, I am the only ship here. So now I'm going to get behind the island in cover, going to reassess the situation. There still is an enemy destroyer. I believe it's a Fletcher that's out in front of me somewhere, so I'm going to have to be very careful. And pretty much every enemy battleship has moved over here to the western side of the map. And as you can see, quite a few of them, especially the Turpets, the Amagi, and even the Gorosokufios, have lost a substantial amount of their hit points. I'm up to almost 90,000 damage here at the beginning of the game. I've only been here down at this part of the map for about 5 minutes, so very, very solid damage done. And I've just been a very big thorn in the enemy side here. The Gorosokufios learned his lesson, and he's going to keep turning back to starboard instead of taking more of my dastardly AP shells, so very good for him. And more enemy shells are in. I believe it was the enemy Amagi that shot at me. Yes, and again, 4,100 damage. Not too bad. I mean, could have been much worse, but I was angled pretty well for those shells that were incoming. To get more AP out of my rear turrets at the Gorosokufios. Shells fall in on the deck. Fail to do any damage, so I switch back to high explosive. Now, I'm not necessarily a big fan of using HE in the ship, but I certainly am not one of those guys that literally only shoots AP. There is a time and place for using high explosive in right there. Immediately switch to HE and get a nice 2,400 damaging salvo with just the rear guns. So you definitely do want to use HE in certain situations, especially with the aforementioned buff a couple patches ago to German HE, but overall, using AP for the majority of your shots is definitely the way to go. Enemy torpedoes were long off my, the rear of the ship, was in no danger of taking. And one thing that I quickly forgot to mention, when I did push into Objective Alpha, if you guys caught it, I did use my hydroacoustic because I was worried again about enemy torpedoes, and that was more of a passive, somewhat passive, maybe a little aggressive use of it, and one of the uses that I don't think my buddy Pun would be very happy with. But again, just in case those enemy torpedoes come in and I'm not paying attention because I'm engaging the enemy battleships, very useful to have in your pocket for that. So again, all of the enemy battleships have head out to the western side here. I do have a couple buddies here on Objective Bravo. The enemy team has lost 2 ships, but unfortunately we've lost 4, and also our friendly carrier. So we're at a severe disadvantage. The points right now, the score is 339 to 644 for our team. And looking for more shots here on the Azumo. He is slightly too angled, so I do switch back to high explosive. The Amagi does take a punt at me, and I do notice it, so I start turning back to starboard right here. Shells flying in, and they all miss. Very good stuff there. Now, this is really the only major mistake. I, once again, just a bad play here, kind of forgot about the reload on the Azumo, and this is the example that I'm talking about here, where you really only take citadels in this thing when you're full broadside or maybe just slightly past full broadside, and you get hit from battleship caliber shells, and there we go. 19,000 compounded with 3,800 damage, and I take about 22,000 damage from that enemy Azumo and lose about half of my remaining hit points. So, yeah, right there, you see, you are going to take citadels from battleship caliber guns if you're at a full broadside or maybe just slightly less or more. But, that was a very bad play. Now I'm starting to take fire from the enemy Mogami. And Japanese cruisers, when they do angle in, the armor piercing suddenly becomes very ineffective. I don't know why, but that just is the case. You see here, you landed a lot of shells right on the top of the belt armor on that Mogami and only do less than 2,000 damage to him. So unfortunately for me, I have to switch back to high explosive. Now, when you're only using your 2 rear turrets and shooting high explosive at targets that are maneuvering, it can be very, very frustrating to deal any damage because, again, German HE is the worst in the game in dealing raw damage, so I'm going to have to make sure my shots count here. And I also do tell my buddy Spider, who has since come back to the east here, I need you to start shooting at that enemy Mogami. I'm going to need some help here. Land a very nice salvo there, 5 out of 6 shells for just over 3,000 damage on the enemy Mogami, and I switch back to armor piercing because I was anticipating him continuing to turn and go broadside, but he did not. The shells impact just at the waterline on the Mogami, and I only do 580 damage off of 1 overpen. Now, I will make a note here. I am very lucky that there is a friendly Tirpitz that is off to my starboard side that is taking all the fire from those enemy battleships. Because, to be honest with you, a Tirpitz, an Azuma, a Grosse Kurfürst, and an Amagi shooting at this thing, and it doesn't matter how good my dodging skills are, it doesn't matter how good my maneuverability is, I would certainly be taking a lot of damage from them if they focus fired on me. I do take a pretty decent hit there from the enemy Azuma, and boom, there we go. Take out the enemy Mogami from my first ship sunk in the game. 121,000 points of damage, 1 citadel, 9 planes shot down, 3 fire set, 246 shell hits already. Take another just under 5,000 hit from the Azuma. But again, it's nothing too awfully serious. It's not catastrophic amounts of AP damage. I certainly would be able to bounce a lot more and take way less damage if I was in any other tier 10 cruiser. But nonetheless, you're seeing my point here. When angled well, this thing doesn't take as much damage from AP as you might think. Certainly not as much as previous tier German cruisers do. Now, I use one of my last damage control abilities here to get quite a bit of hit points back. I was at just over 6,000, and now I get back to 15,000 hit points. Still a pretty decent amount to be toting around, and I do have one more charge. So now, since this enemy Azuma is completely bow into me, I'm going to be shooting a high explosive, constantly monitoring, however, where that Tirpitz is aiming, and I see that he is shooting over in my direction. So as I get this full broadside out at the enemy Azuma, I start to turn back to starboard, and we'll see what the shells do here. I take 1 hit in the butt for just under 5,000 damage. Another decent hit, but again, nothing catastrophic, and as you can see on the screen, I still have a bit more hit points worth on my ship to get back. So I am certainly utilizing the 51,000 hit points that the ship has to good effect. Right now, the enemy team is moving into Objective Alpha, and it scores 414 to 724. They're also about to capture Objective Bravo. My buddy Putin is over at Objective Charlie, being spotted by aircraft in his destroyer, but he was able to capture it. Unfortunately, we're still in quite the bit of a rabbit hole here. The enemy team has only lost 4 ships, and we have lost, 7 ships so far. So this is not looking good whatsoever. I just cracked 300 shells, hit 307 to be exact, 145,000 damage done. Unfortunately, my fire was not able to take out the Azuma as the Grosse Kurfürst on our team. His secondaries were able to take care of business. 146,000 points of damage, 313 shell hits, 1 assisted base cap, 1 citadel, 9 planes shot down, 4 fires set, 2 base defense, and 1 ship destroyed. And now I'm shooting some very long-range shots at these enemy Iowa. He's just under 16 kilometers. Had to clear the barrel of high explosive for just under 1,000. And you're going to see here, once again, armor piercing, hitting right into the superstructure of enemy battleships, and boom, just over 8,000 damage done. A few shells did dip into the upper belt armor. Very good stuff. And look at that. The enemy Iowa is immediately turning away. I would too, because this rate of fire is just so darn good. I turn to dodge his incoming rounds. I do take just 1 hit, 1 overpen for 1350, and I did bounce a couple right there as well. So now I turn my attention back here to Twitchy number 7 here in the Tirpitz. He has just under 30,000 health and is at 15 kilometers, full bow in, so I get the HE back and ready to go. My buddy Spider is moving into Objective Bravo to cap. My buddy Putin is coming back from Objective Charlie. We're doing everything that we can here in this game to help our team out. Get a nice salvo there. Set my 5th fire of the game up to 162,000 damage done here. And my buddy in the Grosse Kurfürst that went out to the west took a bit more off than he could chew, and he is about to die from the Amagi and the other enemy Grosse Kurfürst. So my thinking right here is I got to kill this Tirpitz right now before those enemy battleships are able to kill my buddy, and they're able to focus their attention onto me. Something that they really should have done a long time ago at the expense of their friendly Azuma, at the expense of their friendly Mogami, and now, increasingly, at the expense of their friendly Tirpitz. The damage damage just continues to pile on this guy. Continue to shoot high explosive, and now that he is presenting a full broadside, I switch back to AP, trying to get some more good AP salvos in and really increase the damage to an exponential level. Only 974, a couple shells fail to penetrate. Now the front guns hit, and I do bounce all the shells. A rare, almost 0 damage on a full broadside with AP. I do managed to dodge the shells that are incoming from the Grosse Kurfürst. His forward salvo just missed me. Now I switch back to high explosive, take about another 4,000 damage, and you're seeing here the amount of damage that I'm taking consistently when I'm angled in is anywhere from 3, 4, maybe up to 5,000 damage from one shell, or multiple shells, that is, and that's not bad at all, really, it's not. Set my 6th fire on the Turpitz, he immediately burns his damage control, and I managed to set yet another fire, high caliber secured, and that Turpitz is going to burn down, and before my shells can land on the target, ba-boom, take care of my 2nd ship destroyed in the game, and I'm up to 182,000 points of damage. We're slowly bringing the scores back. It's 581 to 731. The enemy Iowa out in front has breached himself, and my 2 friends are definitely going to be getting some good shots into him. And now I'm able to utilize the OK concealment, since I was still spotted there. I'm now going to reassess the situation and re-angle my ship to try and deal with these 2 enemy battleships. And unfortunately for me, there's this friendly Iowa that's off to my port side that is at pretty much more or less full health. And why he does not decide to deal with these 2 enemy battleships back here when we've brought the score back to within 150 and still have a reasonable chance of securing victory here, I mean, I really don't know why. I probably could have said something in the chat, but obviously at this point in the game, it's 5,600 damage on the Grosse Kurfürst there with a nice salvo. You know, motion's running high, thought process is running fast. Just, you know, didn't really think about it. But I really wish that guy would have looked at the minimap and saw this, because if I would have had some help here, we really could have done some solid work here. Fire some high explosive at the enemy Amagi. I was not anticipating him going completely broadside there. Take another 4,200 damage from him. Armor piercing. Take another decent bit of damage from the enemy Grosse Kurfürsten. How about that? About 4,000 more damage. Unfortunately for me, my hit points have almost run out. I only have 2,700, and I do not have any more health packs to give, so I'm going to have to whittle this Amagi down. 2,400 damage. Now I just got to use this sluggish maneuverability to just try and pray that these shells do not penetrate and do massive amounts of damage. Luckily for me, it just strikes the deck in the front. 1,200 damage. Still trying to pepper him with high explosive, set that fire, and hopefully secure the kill here. More shells flying in. Luckily for me, one of them bounces. 1,493 health. I do get behind the island out of the way of the Grosse Kurfürst shells. I do a decent bit of armor piercing, and unfortunately for me, my buddy my buddy Spider died in Objective Bravo, and now I'm looking for a high explosive. Unfortunately, I get caught by his forward guns, and right as I fire my high explosive, I get killed by the Amagi. High explosive on the way. Will I at least be able to salvage my 3rd kill? Oh yeah, there we go. It's just a flesh wound. 206,000 points of damage. High caliber. 3 ships destroyed. 450 shell hits. 1 assist to base cap. 1 citadel. 9 plane shutdown. 7 fires. And it just wasn't enough. Pardon me, guys, I forgot to take screenshots of the post-battle results for this one, but I already went over the statistics for my ship, shell hits, damage, all that good stuff right at the end there. And as for the team, myself, Puddin, and Spider finished 1, 2, 3 respectively on the squad. It was just a really solid performance by us in the division, and unfortunately our team wasn't able to give us enough support, and still ended up with about 1,700 base XP in a defeat. I only finished worse than 4 of the enemy ships on the winning side, so that's a really good performance there. And overall, you just saw the massive amounts of damage that you can rack up when you're not the one that's being focused on by more than a couple ships. And I just really felt that was a good use of the AP, really good use of the high explosive. Got the hydroacoustic there at the beginning. You saw how good the AA was against lower tier carriers. Just overall, I really hope you guys thought that that was some quality gameplay, so you can just see how this thing performs in action. And let me tell you, I really love this ship. It's my favorite ship in the game, and I highly recommend to anybody playing World of Warships to definitely go down the German cruiser line. It's really fun, and I enjoyed it. And it was also my first tier 10 ship, so that's probably why I have some affection for it. But nonetheless, thank you guys for watching the review of the mighty Hindenburg. Please leave a like, comment, a subscription, whatever you're feeling. I really like the support that our channel has gotten, and once again, I know I like to mention this all the time, but really thank you guys for helping us build and continue to build on our channel, and hopefully we can continue to provide you with more glorious and good World of Warships content. This is the Sneaky Snake for Brothers in Arms World of Warships signing off. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.